What if I told you the 19th century wasn't powered by oil or steel or even banks? For a brief, dangerous moment in modern history, the world ran on one thing: cotton. Not just as fabric, not just as a crop, but as money. An empire of wealth built in the American South, financed by global banks, feeding British factories, and quietly holding the world economy together. It looked efficient, predictable, powerful. But beneath that system was something erased from the balance sheets: human beings. And when war came, the South believed it held the ultimate weapon. They called it King Cotton. They thought the world would bow. They were wrong, because they misunderstood where real power lived. And when the illusion broke, it didn't shatter loudly. It collapsed financially. Let's talk about how cotton ruled the world and why it fell. The 19th century did not belong to oil. It did not belong to steel, and it did not belong to banks, at least not yet. For a brief and dangerous window in modern history, the world economy ran on cotton. And the center of that world was not London, Paris, or New York. It was a stretch of land in the American South, worked by enslaved labor, financed through credit, and deeply connected to global banking networks. This system looked efficient from the outside, stable and productive, but its efficiency depended entirely on the legal erasure of human beings. The forced labor of enslaved people was treated not as human suffering, but as predictable economic input. Welcome to the financial reality behind the myth, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it first appears. When most people think about the American South before the Civil War, they picture a slow, rural region, plantations, open fields, and an economy trailing behind the industrial North. That image feels familiar and even comforting, but it is deeply misleading. In the decades before 1861, the Southern cotton economy was not peripheral to global capitalism. It was one of its load-bearing pillars, and it was built on coercion so absolute that it allowed the system to operate with terrifying consistency. By the early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had transformed Europe, especially Britain, into an industrial machine hungry for raw materials on a scale the world had never seen before. Textile mills multiplied rapidly. Urban populations surged, and cotton became the single most important industrial input on Earth. It was light, strong, cheap to transport, and adaptable to countless uses. There was no meaningful substitute. By the 1830s, the United States was producing the majority of the world's raw cotton, and almost all of it came from southern states. In some years, American cotton supplied more than 3/4 of the cotton used by British industry, the industrial core of the global economy. Remove southern cotton and factories slowed. Workers lost wages. Exports declined. Government revenues shrank. This was not a niche crop or a regional specialty. It was systemic. Cotton sat at the center of global trade flows, industrial production, and national balance sheets. But this story is not only about agriculture. It is about finance. Cotton was not simply grown, harvested, and sold. It was financialized long before modern derivatives markets existed. Planters did not wait until harvest to earn money. They borrowed against future crops. Banks extended credit based on projected yields. Merchants issued letters of credit backed by cotton bales that had not yet left the fields. In effect, cotton functioned as a reserve asset. It was predictable, standardized, and globally liquid. But that predictability came at extraordinary human cost. Enslaved people were recorded as capital on balance sheets, valued alongside land and projected output. They were legally denied personhood so that the financial system could treat their forced labor as stable and reliable. Plantations operated less like traditional farms and more like asset factories. Land was leveraged. Future output was monetized in advance. Human beings were reduced to ledger entries. This structure tied the Southern economy directly into international banking networks, especially those centered in London. British financiers did not need to own land in Mississippi to profit from it. They only needed the cotton and the system that guaranteed its production regardless of human suffering. Year after year, cotton flowed. Ships carried it across the Atlantic. British mills spun it into textiles. Finished goods were exported across the globe. Profits moved through insurers, shipping firms, merchants, and banks. At every stage, finance quietly extracted value. The system appeared efficient precisely because its true costs were borne by people who had no legal power to refuse it. Calling the antebellum South pre-industrial misses the point entirely. The South was not industrial in machinery, but it was industrial in finance. It supplied the raw asset that stabilized global trade balances and anchored credit systems. Cotton exports became one of the largest sources of foreign exchange for the United States. They paid for imported goods. They supported the expansion of banking. They underwrote economic growth far beyond the region itself. Cotton functioned as the South's monetary anchor, not because it was morally defensible, but because global markets rewarded reliability without questioning how that reliability was enforced. This success created dangerous confidence among Southern elites, an ideology known as King Cotton. The belief seemed simple and rational. If the world depended on Southern cotton, then the South held leverage over the world. If Britain needed cotton to keep its factories operating, then Britain would never allow that supply to be cut off. Economic dependence, they assumed, would translate into political obedience. It is a familiar mistake. When you control a critical input, it is easy to believe you control the system itself. But leverage only works if others have no alternatives. And global finance has always been ruthless about finding alternatives when survival is at stake. For decades, the numbers appeared to support their confidence. Cotton made up a massive share of American exports. Southern planters wielded influence far beyond their population size. Credit flowed easily. Prices remained strong. The system looked stable, even elegant, if one ignored who paid the price for that stability. Yet the real weakness in the structure was not moral outrage. It was financial vulnerability. The South controlled production, but it did not control liquidity. Much of the capital that financed plantations came from northern banks or European lenders. Insurance markets were based in London. Shipping firms operated internationally. Textile profits accumulated overseas. The South generated leverage, but it did not own the financial plumbing that transformed leverage into resilience. As long as cotton flowed uninterrupted, this imbalance did not matter. The moment it stopped flowing, everything would change. That moment arrived with war. When Southern states seceded in 1860 and 1861, their leaders believed cotton would be their ultimate weapon. If exports were cut off, they reasoned, Britain would be forced to intervene. Factories would close. Workers would riot. Governments would pressure Washington. King Cotton would rule. The American Civil War is often told as a moral reckoning or political rupture. It was also a brutal lesson in financial reality. Controlling a commodity does not mean controlling the system that prices it, finances it, and replaces it when necessary. The collapse did not arrive as dramatic justice. It arrived as disintegration. Financial systems rarely fail with ceremony. They fail quietly, unevenly, and with consequences that fall hardest on those least responsible for their design. When cotton stopped functioning as reliable collateral, the Southern economy began to unravel. The first shock was not military, it was financial. As the war dragged on and blockades tightened, cotton exports became unreliable. That alone destabilized credit. Loans had been written against future harvests. Insurance contracts assumed predictable shipping flows. Entire balance sheets depended on cotton moving, being priced, and being sold. When that assumption broke, everything built upon it broke as well. Southern planters suddenly found themselves overleveraged. Debts that had once seemed manageable became impossible to repay. Banks stopped extending credit. Merchants demanded cash instead of promises. What had appeared to be a self-sustaining system revealed itself as tightly wound and dependent on constant motion. Meanwhile, the world adjusted. British manufacturers suffered during the so-called cotton famine, but they did not collapse. Capital shifted toward new suppliers. Cotton cultivation expanded in India and Egypt. Prices rose. Incentives changed. Within a few years, global supply chains had rerouted. It was painful, but it was survivable. This moment exposed the real hierarchy of power. The South controlled production. Global finance controlled substitution. And substitution is the ultimate weapon against leverage. By the time Southern leaders realized that King Cotton would not force European intervention, it was too late. The leverage they believed to be absolute was conditional. The global system did not bend to protect a single supplier. It rewired itself. Inside the Confederacy, the consequences were catastrophic. With exports disrupted, cotton lost credibility as collateral. Credit evaporated. Governments printed money to cover deficits. Inflation surged. Prices detached from wages. Ordinary people, enslaved individuals, poor whites, small farmers, absorbed the shock first, while elites attempted to preserve value in land, goods, or foreign currency. This was not a moral reckoning. It was a financial collapse. The Civil War may have been a moral turning point, but financially it was a textbook example of what happens when a system built on a single asset loses credibility. When the foundation fails, the damage cascades downward. After the war, the cotton economy did not disappear, but its role changed fundamentally. Cotton remained important, yet it no longer functioned as a monetary anchor. The South was absorbed into a national financial system dominated by northern banks, industrial capital, and federal authority. The region lost leverage, autonomy, and access to credit on its own terms. Dependency replaced dominance. Enslaved people gained legal freedom, but many were pushed into new systems of debt, sharecropping, and economic coercion. Financial structures adapted faster than justice did. And this is where the story stops being about the 19th century. The same mistake repeats across history. Societies confuse control over production with control over power. They assume that being indispensable today guarantees protection tomorrow. They mistake leverage for sovereignty. But real financial power does not live in fields or raw resources. It lives in credit systems, insurance markets, shipping contracts, and institutions capable of absorbing shock and reallocating pain. The American empire of cotton did not collapse because it lacked morality. It collapsed because it misunderstood where wealth truly lived. Wealth did not live in the fields. It lived in the financial architecture surrounding them. That lesson still applies. History does not repeat, but financial illusions do. And they usually fail the same way, slowly at first and then all at once. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers.